Hi, this is a guy in Den, and welcome to my new channel, Storytime with a Guy in His Den. This will be a channel about pretty much anything. It can be about real life things. It can be just stuff that I made up, that I thought about, stories that I've been mulling around in my head for ages. It could be simple things, philosophical things, political, philosophical things. I will try to keep politics to a minimum, but when I talk about political philosophy, that's more value ideas than specific of the moment. And certainly there are a lot of things in the moment right now. But values and who you are is just as important as anything. And I'm not talking about just values as who you are, but values that you live. But for this very first stumbling step into my stored world, I'm going to talk about something that happened fairly recently. I love walking. I have walked my whole life. In my mind's eye, I can remember in such splendid detail about some specific elements in my life. And it usually involves something like wandering or walking. It is strange that there are so many things that shape our worlds, but in my world, the walking are the memories that have lasted. Sure, there are traumatic and happy moments, like the birth of my daughter. Those are important, happy moments. The death of my mom, extremely unhappy moment that shaped my life in so many different ways. But some of my best, most lasting memories are the ones that are tied to me and my wanderlust. And not wanderlust in the fact that I never found a permanent home or I'm almost always on the road. That's not true. There are some people where wanderlust is all they have. They cannot sit still and they cannot settle down. No, my wanderlust is the observation of the world around me, even in the most familiar ways. And this is one of those stories. Now, some of these stories are going to be very simple. There's nothing traumatic about them. It's just a moment of feeling and something in you that shape you. And this one happened fairly recently. But let's add a little bit background. And I'm not going to go very deeply into this very background. That's probably a good story for another time. I started walking again over a year and a half ago. And it's not like I ever stopped walking. It's just that for a time, with my back and my hip and all those things, I really couldn't walk that much. Much of this has to do with me losing a job after 13 years and then going through a couple of job experiences that were less than happy. Again, stories for another time. But in this case, I had some news about my own health and I had to start walking. And I started walking every single day, usually in the afternoon when I take a break. I used to do that in a job that lasted for 13 years. It was in this industrial park and there was a road just above that wasn't well traveled. A lot of people walked there. But it was a nice way of just breaking up your day. You get to go and stretch, go for a little walk around the place, observe things. That has always been one of the things that I do, observe. Not in a creepy way. I don't look into people's windows or anything like that, but observe. Because each walk, no matter how familiar, always have something unique with it. It can be a part of the seasons, or it could be a part of something that wasn't there. And that's true with where I live as well. It's a familiar path. I am a little bit of a creature of habit, so I generally walk the same way. I'm not one of those people that go one way one day and another way the other day. That would break up monotony, of course, but there's something wonderful about the familiarity of the same path, but at the same time finding something new to watch, something new to observe. And that always happens. And it's funny how we don't view things that we experience other than, say, what we see. To me, the whole thing about observing and what you do is also hear or feel. The one day you go out and walk and you freeze because it's cold outside and you didn't put on the right jacket, or your nose is cold and dripping. Or the one day when it's just so hot that after a while when you walk, it feels like your entire, not body is sweating, but you're cooking. You know what I mean? You're sticky. You can't be comfortable in your walk. It's just sweating your sweat, so to speak. Or other time when all you hear is the rustle of leaves, dry leaves, in the fall time. That low summer whisper of wind through the trees have now become something dry, something dying. Because each season adds its flavor, both smells and visions and feelings. And they all have their own nuances to it. Springtime, a lot of birds are coming in. It's a little bit cold. You don't really hear the wind as something that is a murmur in the trees, but more like an anticipation of that explosion of growth that you feel as things gets warmer and you start seeing those buds on the trees. That is accompanied with the transition into summer. The one time those bushes start growing and you see the first flowers coming out, where the all gray hay brown turns into lush green, or the opposite, as the end of the summer slowly turns into fall, where things die. The emerald green turn into a decaying brown and black, where leaves turn from a full green that gets darker, drier, red, yellow, and starts falling out, where the wind feels warm as it filters through trees, like a whisper, a gentle crowd. And then it gets drier, fewer, as the leaves fall off. The winds turn into a howl. But as the winter comes, it's just not the cold, but it's also this absence of sound. As the summer goes into fall and the fall goes into winter, the birds are gone. You might hear more about the Canada geese leaving, as you can hear them honk their way to a new destination. But it's also about the dryness of the grass along the edge of the pond, And it's also a feeling as sounds becomes more sad. Summer has life. Fall has a sadness. And winter, that's when everything goes to sleep, waiting for spring. And that all happens even on the same walk, same path, same steps, same time. Everything changes. And this happened to be different in the fact that I went for a walk close to midnight. It was probably 11 p.m. something. I don't know what made me do so. I think this was late June this year or early July. I can't remember exact same day. I could, of course, look up when we had that storm that went by, but that's not really relevant to the discussion. What exact day, what exact hours, this really doesn't matter. It's the memory inside you. That's the one that you hang on to. But I decided to go for a walk. And I do believe it's because I had walked all day and I felt a little bit I needed a stretch before going to bed. So here I was. The first late walk in ages. I've done it before. But most of the time I walk during the day, early morning, afternoon, say 1 or 2 o'clock, or even later. In the case that it's too hot or warm during the day, then you do it right after dinner or right before dinner. This was right after a storm, and that's kind of the wonderful thing about it. I decided to go for the light walk. A storm had swept by. It never hit our area. It was one of those weird, small, little scattered thunderstorms that you could hear rumble in the distance, but it never hit and it never rained where I live. So as I was walking, you had a dark, deep blue that stretched from one part of the middle to the horizon, and the rest was the dark night coming in. And as the night pushed that last vestige of the day, there was a weird shade from black to deep blue all the way to the horizon. And then you had the stars. You could see them above. The sky was clear. And as you looked towards the horizon, you could see the jagged edge, the silhouettes of the trees that kind of frame where I live. And right above that were this gray cloud bank, illuminated by the sun that had dipped down and then still kind of had a couple of tendrils of light in that dark blue. And there was this cloud bank just above the jagged line of the trees. And in those cloud banks were that thunderstorm that had passed. If you ever seen one of those globes that where you put your fingertips on it, you have that static electricity like tendrils, electric tendrils from the center of the globe stretching out and hitting your fingertips. So this wasn't like a thunderstorms where you see those jagged lightning bolts. You hear that intense crash and thunder, and then you see that lightning bolts like a flash against your cornea, so when you close your eyes you can still see it. No, this was further off. You could see the bulbous cloud of that low cloud bank, and then the sky above. And then you saw those tendrils of light flashing out, spreading among the clouds. And you can barely hear a rumble, barely. Most of the time you didn't. It was so far in distance to the north and northwest that you couldn't really see all the details, but you saw those tendrils of light every now and then in different places in that cloud bank as it was slowly moving away. And it was marvelous. So I started my walk, taking a left out of where we live. And I was walking down the walk path. There's one on each side of the road that circles around our neighborhood. And there was this eerie orange light from the street lights. They're probably about 20 or so, 25 feet apart. It's not that tremendous many. It's not a huge neighborhood. And you could see how that orange light was filtering through the trees, all those tiny little trees that had been planted over time. And they come in such maturity rate that they had recently finished off the rest of the neighborhood. I do believe they had started building it up until about 2006 when the housing market crashed. And then after that, whoever had developed and built those houses went under. And then eventually someone else bought that up and built out the rest. So for the longest time, the whole area around the circle that had been built in anticipation of more houses was just grass. And now there are houses, and now there are street lights. And those street lights filtered through the maturity of the trees that range from the very inlet to our neighborhood, where they were almost mature and tall, to the much smaller ones, which is an interesting way of measuring rate of trees' growth. But here you are as we walk down. I can see that orange light through the tree crowns. And it was so quiet. That's the interesting part about night, even in the summer. It's so quiet. Most you could hear is insects. It wasn't like last year's when the 7-year cicadas came out, that it was just this low buzz and murmur 24/7. No, this was more like the sporadic grasshopper, cricket, or even cicada. And then most you could hear was the humming of the AC, like a low bass, or when it comes on, how it rattles, how that grid on top of the ones that just, covers over the fan, how it kind of rattles into place before it reaches maximum speed. That you can hear. Nothing else. As you got closer to the curve that goes around, and you see all those houses, the condos lining up, I could hear some of that thunderstorm very far away. It wasn't intense. It was just like a low rumble, a constant low rumble. And you could see those flashes in the clouds as you walked around. My steps were probably louder than anything. My breath, as I had a fairly brisk walk. I'm to the point where when I walk, I just speed around. Sure, I can still enjoy it. I can still walk relatively fast. But here I was walking around, observing, looking. Now, as I said, I'm not a creeper. I don't look into people's windows. But you still can observe who's awake and who's not. Like the dark frame of a window where people are fully asleep. Or a night light. How you have that kind of darkness around it with a gloom of a night light somewhere. Or a kitchen that's fully lit up. Or the living rooms where you have the flickering pale white light of someone watching a TV. And you might even get a glimpse of a corner of a TV on the upstairs or below. And it's not like I'm going to stand there and watch TV. No, but you can see. It's just a part of the whole observation. Some you will probably recognize over time. It's just the same person being up extremely late. But most of the time, it's sort of a random thing. Whole stretches can be dark, others can be sporadically lit up. And it adds to that tremendous feeling of being at peace. And I walked around and I listened to my steps that had this, it's kind of tempo, if you might say. And then sometimes when you step on gravels, it gets kind of that typically graveling sound. And as the whole neighborhood loops around in kind of like a circle, and then goes back and out towards the inlet to this neighborhood, there's also a part where you can split to the right that goes into an end. And that's where you have the municipal water well, and you also have a wooden fencing around it. And that's also where you have the strip of the wood that divides our neighborhood from a farm and farmland. And it's just a thin strip of wood, a couple of trees deep that kind of line up to be the windbreaker between the farmland. And there's a couple of dots of dried up ponds a little bit here and there. And here towards the end, it just comes to a stop with one of those signs to say, hey, don't go here, someone lives here. Well, it doesn't exactly say that. It's not that articulate. But as you get and you walk in there, you see this abyssal dark, because the last lantern or the last street light that kind of casts this eerie orange light doesn't stretch entirely all the way. Now you have the porch lights from the backside of the condos that faces this, but it's eerie. It's kind of a little bit gloomy. You can see the outline of the fencing around the municipal water well, and you see this dark tree line. As some of the crowns of the trees are lit up from that street light and the back porch lights, but most of it is like walking into the dark. And it gets quiet. Here you are probably the furthest away from the street and from all the other sounds. You don't hear the ACs anymore. You go into this dark end, and switches just across the tree, close to the tree lines. You switch over to the other side of the walk path and then walk back. And you can hear that small breeze rustle in the wind, and you hear more of an intensity as the insects are still out, slightly singing to each other. And there was hundreds of fireflies just lighting up towards the dark silhouette of the trees. In every deep shadow, you saw these streaks of light as the fireflies were dancing up and down. And I walked around, so very close to the very edge of these trees. It should be spooky. Sometimes when I walk and it's extremely dark, that's primal fear that takes over. But I was calm. I could hear the slight rumble, the intensity of the insects. So I walked over, observed how on the grass next to the municipal well, how you saw those fireflies dancing up and down in every single shadow. And then I walked by. And as I walked by, there's more of a strip of a wood as you go back to where all the condos are. And inside that little strip of wood, I could see the dashing of fireflies, like little explosions, dancing up and down, closer to the ground. And then I walked back. I walked back around the circle again. I looked at the cloud bank further off, and I felt so at peace. It was just me, a step against the ground, the sound of the AC, the low rumble, insects here and there. Some were a little bit more intense depending on where you walked. And I walked all the way out towards the road. And that's the main road that goes by. And as I walked there, it was more of an intensity of breeze. When you go around a circle, it gets kind of still because of how that line of condos breaks the wind. There are some areas that are a little bit more open where you have the space in between the condos. And at those times, if it's a good breeze going on, you can truly feel it. Other times it gets so like solidly still, and it gets intensely warm in those areas. And here, when I was walking towards the end of the neighborhood, it's more of an open, it's a funnel of wind, and you can hear it rush against your ears. So you kind of have to tilt your head a little bit in order to hear more of the details. Otherwise, you have that rush of the breeze across your ears. And I was walking towards the main pond. And it's when you walk towards the end, it's on your right-hand side, and the last line of the new condos on the left-hand side. And you have those street lights that are apart, about 25 or so feet apart. One on one side at the very end of the last row of condos, then one on the opposite side, and one further down towards the inlet. And as I walked there, I could hear the ducks in the pond. There's that weird clunking sound where they almost echolocate each other, just bouncing back and forth. It's just slight echo across the pond water. There's about 2 or 3 benches lined out facing the pond. And as I walked there, and the sound of some insects, AC units, and that clunking sound, I looked inwards towards the pond and across to the row of condos with the odd lights lit up. But I could see a streak from someone's, I think it was a garage light, how it streaked across the pond itself, the water, just lit up and a little bit shredded because of a slight breeze across the pond water. The double reflection of the trees, the few that lines around the pond, close to the condos itself, and how it has the mirror image in the water of the pond. And I walked all the way out towards the entrance, not towards the road. And now you start hearing more of the odd car rush by. It's like civilization gets closer. At the very end, by the municipal water, there was that quiet. It was as if nature owned that area. And here, you're getting closer to the road. And you're reminded we're part of an extremely busy world where people are still driving at almost 12 o'clock. But I felt so at peace. That walk was one of the greatest walks, and it was an observation. It's the same path I walked during the day. Similar circumstances of getting closer to the road, and more busy during the day, of course. And then towards the very end, during the day, where you do have more of the nature sounds. But here, you didn't have the bird during the days, just have the clucking of those ducks in the pond. And I felt like an experience that I haven't felt in a very long time as I turned around and walked home. It was an experience I had to tell my wife, and my daughter was still awake and up. because I was so excited by the experience. It was so wonderful, so invigorating. At that moment, I felt more alive than any walk during the day. It was as if my wanderlust had rewarded me with an experience that I will remember for a very long time. This was the formation of a memory that 10 years from now might be a little bit different in my mind, but it's a feeling like so many other things. It's not just a physical remembrance of a particular moment. It is a representation and a feeling, because all our senses are part of the observations in everything that we do. I never understood people that can walk and be on their phone at the same time. What's the point of walking? Is it just to get some physical exercise, if that's all you're trying to achieve? Or should a walk be everything? It should be a moment to feel the physical and experience the emotional. That's what I believe. And that was my walk. My midnight walk after the storm. A experience that I will remember for many years. Partly because it was so unique for that very moment, but also because it was a new experience, something that I have done a little bit more of since then. Not necessary to rekindle the experience, but to further enhance something that I normally do. So I have now started walking during the day, and I'm walking closer to midnight. On the days that I can, of course, like vacation days and whatnot. But it's a wonderful experience. It's such a difference in both sound and feelings, and kind of like emotional strain too, because I still don't like dark areas. And that's a story for another time, because I have a feeling I know why. You have a fantastic day. I hope your life turns out exactly the way you want it to be. That you have these experiences, whether it's walking or anything else that you do, fishing. That perfect day when you went for a swim. The one time in the summer where you stand up tall, stretch out, you see through your closed eyes that intense red as you face almost the sun, and that feeling on your skin of that warm sun. You know, the feeling when you walk out of a home that is cooled by AC and you're kind of a little bit cold in the extremities. And then you walk outside and you can feel that buttery light against your skin, and it just warms you from outside in. Until it gets uncomfortable, the humidity kicks in, and you start feeling boil and start sweating all over. But at that very transition between that cold, and you're going to start your walk, or your wanderlust kicks in that very moment when you feel that warmth against your skin and you're a little bit shivery and cold inside, that is a moment worth feeling. Adieu.